has overwhelmed me, and I feel like giving up. I will cling to all you've promised. It will always be enough. When the world around me crumbles, and it's hard to understand, I will run to you, my shelter. I am safe within your hands. Oh, you are my help forever. I will not fear. God, you are with me. I know you're near. You'll never leave me. I will trust in you alone. When I'm broken in the silence, I can hear you whispering. You're not alone here in these trials. I will hold you faithfully. Oh, you are my not fear. God, I know you're near. You'll never leave me. To rest in you alone. And when my heart and strength have failed me, my God, your name is mighty. To rest in you alone. Oh, you are a fortress for the weak, the strength that carries me when I am on my knees. The cross reminds my heart to trust your faithfulness and love will always be enough. Oh, you are a fortress for the weak, the strength that carries me when I am on my knees. The cross reminds my heart to trust your faithfulness and love Dear God, thank you again for bringing all these people here. I love hearing their voices. Please bless the sermon today and everyone who continues to walk through these doors. We love you. Amen.
Thank you for that worship. This crew is a little bit of a newer team, and I always enjoy them. They've maybe a year or so now. And thanks so much, Megan and company. And thank you all. This is an official welcome. Many of you are here every week, and you're familiar with this, but I know there's some that this may be your first time, or you're not so familiar with what we do here, and we really appreciate you coming and being a part of this. What else is up?
You're here. We do this every week too.
Do we do this every week?
We do this every week.
So if it's your first time, we do this every week.
So this is how we're giving offering currently. There's lots of different ways you can do it.
Lots of ways.
But we are not picking it up in baskets, so we're not doing it.
Don't want to pass the tray.
No. So you can go to Adventist Giving on the app, right there.
Right there.
Or you can mail it into Summit.
Pony Express.
Or you can go to our website, summitnorthwest.org, and donate that way. Or
There's more.
There's one more. When you come to church, we do have boxes that you can put the offering in. So there's 2 boxes back there, and there's 2 boxes by the drinking fountain, I believe.
Which I saw a sign on we're not supposed to use.
Okay, so do not use the 2 boxes by the drinking fountain.
Yeah, but they're still good landmarks.
Oh, don't use the drinking fountain. I thought you said don't use the boxes.
Oh,
I'm so confused.
I was vague. Yes, that
Okay.
was a good clarification. Thank you. You can,
Don't use the drinking fountain, apparently.
Don't use the drinking fountain.
Okay.
Moving
Do
on.
use the lock boxes for giving offering. There we go. Okay.
What's next? Schedule. Oh, we love. Not yet changing. How many weeks in a row have we been the same now?
Well, this is the second week of 2 services, right? Or is this the third? This is the third week of 2
That's
services.
why I asked you. I don't know.
I don't know. It's all blending into one. Still 2 services, though.
So yeah, there we go. It's 2 services, coffee bar. So it looks like next week we're planning for the same thing. Not sure after that. I was week in Oregon, and Multnomah County, which is one of the main metro Portland counties, just applied to go into phase 1 of their reopening.
Whoa.
So if they're accepted, a week from now, they get to do that. So we're way ahead of them.
Yeah.
And we're almost in, I don't even know what June 13 is. That phase 4 that we shift into?
I think Idaho does go into phase 4 on that week. And then I think the next week, June 20th, we're kind of maybe rocking the boat a little bit.
Whoa.
With some new stuff. But we'll get to that next week.
Okay.
And always there's live stream.
Live
So
streams. So if you're not right here right now and you're looking at a camera, I'm looking at cameras, then hello. Thank you for live streaming and watching us. Oh, and stay tuned to website and Facebook and any place else for changes.
Right. And we also have a baptism next week. So that's why the change is up here a little bit. So that's just FYI to put.
Yeah, if you're wondering why you can't see the screen or why we did this, it's because there's a baptismal tank right there. And kind of side note, that we have some folks that said, yeah, I want to take that step. If you're on that radar screen, and I've been talking with the family, and I need to try to find them again here, and you think, well, I've been thinking of baptism. It could be a time to connect with Ron. He's the guy in the mask back there trying to hide out, or myself, or Rebecca, and we can help coordinate that if you're thinking, yeah, I'm ready for that step.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Bulletin.
What else? Oh,
So
bulletin.
we're not passing out actual bulletins currently, trying to stop the spread of germs. But you can see a bulletin online, which has more information than what we're giving you this morning. I know. Shocker.
There's some
We give-
contact
we give
information
lots
among
of
other things.
information. So you just have to text that number up there, 208-274-5905. Text bulletin to that number, and then it will pop up, and you can hit on that, and the bulletin will pop up. That's a current
Yes,
version
it
of
is.
all things
I
going on here.
even looked at it recently. Okay, so next week, this is next week, right? I get a little bit muddled
Yes.
in my, okay. We are going to celebrate, and I think we came up with a plan of what we're going to do. Usually we have some graduation cake and we give it out, but just, I'm not sure about how to do that, but I think Barb Hessel came up with the idea of ice cream bars. Because they're prepackaged. So next week we're going to celebrate all the graduates, and you all get to do that. We'll have treats out there, but this is your final week. If you have a graduate and you haven't texted me or emailed me or signed up on the clipboard out in the lobby, please do that. Our list is a little shorter this year, which is fine. But we want to make sure we have everybody. So 8th grade, high school, college, even postgraduate, the folks that are basically involved with our program here, we want to recognize them. We give them gifts. We call their names out, all that kind of stuff. So there's my contact information, and I've heard from a number of you, but not all of you. Well, maybe I have heard from all you. I don't know. Let us know about your graduates, and we'll celebrate next week with ice cream.
Yes, that sounds awesome.
I love ice cream.
Yeah, me too. So children's ministries, still a little bit on a standstill, but every week we are enjoying bringing you a children's story. I currently am just adding more people to the children's story. It's just becoming that way.
Good.
So I have my helpers today, Teacher Travis.
I'm not one of them, so I'm going to step down.
And Teacher Callista.
And take over.
And we miss all of you kids being able to do Sabbath school with you. So this is just bringing a little bit of that to you.
Okay, this is another live action installment of one of Rebecca's amazing books. So I'm going to sit up here so you can't miss any of the pictures or the action. So this book's called Strictly No Elephants. The trouble with having a tiny elephant for a pet is that you never quite fit in. No one else has an elephant. Every day I take my elephant for a walk. He is a very thoughtful sort of a walk. He doesn't like the cracks in the sidewalk much. I always have to go back and help him over. That's what friends do, lift each other over the cracks. Today, I'm walking my tiny elephant to number 17. It's Pet Club Day, and everyone will be there. Come along. There's a good boy. I coax him the last few feet. It'll be fine. Then I look up. There's a sign on the door. Strictly no elephants. My tiny elephant leads me back to the sidewalk, never minding the cracks. That's what friends do. Brave the scary things for you. Did you go to the pet club meeting too? The girl asks. Yes, I say, but they don't allow elephants. The sign didn't mention skunks, the girl says, but they don't want us to play with them either. They don't know any better, I tell her. He doesn't stink. No, he doesn't, I agree. What if we start our own club? Come along, I say, making certain that my tiny elephant follows me, because that's what friends do. Never leave anyone behind. We can play here, one of our new friends say. All of us. So we paint our own sign. All are welcome. My tiny elephant will give you directions if you need them, because that's what friends do.
Thank you, thank you. Get this off. Got to figure out a hearing aid friendly mask. Let's take better care of your hearing, kids. Don't get old. Hey, good morning, church. Good to have you all with us today. It's good to be back. We had a little bit of time away last week. It was great. We were actually able to visit here at Summit last week, and it was wonderful. Things went so smoothly. What a great team we have. It went so smoothly, I'm considering skipping out more often. It's just great. Hope you're all surviving and thriving. Lots of changes, excitement. I was telling somebody this morning, I feel a little bit like one of the explorers, right? It's like you go around the bend and like, oh, didn't see that happening. And then we get to adjust and we get to try something new. And so quite exciting. It's going to be fun, right? You guys don't sound very convinced. Oh, yeah. So it's going to be fun adjusting to this new normal, right? Yes. We're in the middle of a sermon series on making a difference. What does it take to make a difference? And we're looking at the story of Elijah. Sometimes we think that because we aren't living in Bible times, because we aren't a prophet, maybe there's just one of us, we're a small group, we can't really make a difference. Well, Elijah's story is about you don't have to have a majority make a difference. You don't even have to have superhuman faith to make a difference. God has called us to make a difference right where we're at. So let's just jump into the story today. It's in 1 Kings chapter 17. Last week, Pastor Terry had a great message for us. The previous 2 weeks, remember we talked about this being in the context of a love story. So if anything weird shows up in the story, it's part of this love story, and we have to figure out how does this fit into a love story. So that's where we're at, 1 Kings. If you have your Bibles there, your Bible apps, open up chapter 1. Because I forgot about this being here, so sometimes it's going to scroll down, maybe be below the drum shell, and have your Bible apps. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my words." Verse 2, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. "Leave here, turn eastward, hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You'll drink from the brook, and I've directed the ravens to supply you with foods there." So he did what the Lord told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. He stayed there, and the ravens brought him fruit and brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. It's an odd story, right? Right from the start. God's upset with Ahab and Jezebel and the way they've been leading Israel. And we spent the last couple of sermons that I preached on this. So if you're fuzzy about why Baal worship is so offensive, go back and check those last couple of sermons. But in short, Baal worship is so awful. God just couldn't allow it to continue. He had to step in, and none of us would want it to continue. These last few weeks, we have been horrified as we've watched unfold and seen over and over again on social media discuss the unjust treatment of African Americans, specifically George Floyd and others at the hand of some in law enforcement. And it's easy to use large paint brushes to paint those on both sides of the issue. For those of us who are not in law enforcement, I think we need to be very careful how we judge people who are in the line of fire day in and day out. On the other hand, there's no excuse for injustice. God's very clear on this. God hates injustice. Micah 6:8. Most of you can sing the song. You know it by heart. God's very clear on what he requires of us. Act justly. Love mercy. And to walk humbly with your God. We love prophecy. A few years ago, it's actually been quite a few. There was the last year we were at Newman Lake, and the first full season we were in here, we ended up preaching this sermon series. We asked you, sent out a survey and said, what would you want to have presented for sermons? You're the congregation, you're hearing each week. What is it that you would like? Overwhelmingly, the response was, we want to hear about prophecy. Tell us about prophecy. It's a special interest to our denomination, but it's not just an Adventist thing. As I talk with my fellow community pastors, it's similar there. People want to hear about prophecy, specifically time prophecy. Here's what I find interesting. Of all the prophets in the Bible, and there are a number of them, very few actually deal with time prophecy. Daniel, really, is about the only one. The vast majority of the prophets deal with the issue of injustice. When God sends a prophet to give a prophetic message, he rarely, almost never, sends a message about time. Instead, when God sends a prophet to speak a prophetic message, it is almost always about this issue of dealing with injustice. God is passionate about reversing injustice. We want to avoid the topic. We don't like talk about it. We would rather fill out time charts. God intentionally and regularly brings us back to this issue of, and this message about injustice. And we need to listen to it. Let me recommend this to you. The next time you want to consider or you want to think about what God says about prophecy, consider that the message is just as clear today as it was thousands of years ago. It's not about time. If you're focused on time, let me tell you right now, you're just flat out focused on the wrong thing. It's not there. This is what God requires. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Racism is evil. I can say it no plainer than that. Racism is evil, it is immoral, and in addition to that, it's just plain stupid. I'd like to give you an example of how stupid racism can be. Most of you know I'm a Canadian. I actually hold dual citizenship, and I'm proud of both. I'm very proud to be an American of Canadian heritage. But many of you probably don't know why I became a Canadian, how our family became Canadians. Here's a picture of my folks from a few years back. My dad passed away a few years back. My mom's still alive, but this was quite a bit younger. In the early 50s, my dad came to the United States to study at what was then known as Walla Walla College. He came over from Australia. It's a long story how he ended up in Australia. I'd love to share that with you sometime. He was born German ancestry, born of German parents who were serving as German missionaries in Ethiopia at the time of his birth. After World War II, family was relocated to Australia because the British and the Russians came in. The British actually took all the men, my grandfather, Opa, and he spent 7 years in a POW camp in Australia. And at the end of that time, the Australian government offered all of the POW prisoners citizenship if they wanted to stay. And the General Conference says, you're missionaries, we need to strengthen the work in South Australia, will you please stay on there? And so that's how they end up in Australia. My dad was disappointed. He wanted to go to America, United States. He was fascinated by America. He loved all things American. He was in Germany when the Americans came in, and I heard described the tanks and the soldiers coming in and playing ball and handing out chocolate bars, and they liberated them from Hitler-led fascism, and my dad wanted to go to America. And when he was a sophomore in college, he had that opportunity, came over to Walla Walla. The problem was, every time he only had a student visa. And whenever the student visa would run out, he had to leave the country in order to work. And rather than going back to Australia, he went to a Commonwealth country, ended up in Canada. He'd work, and then he would try to get back into the United States. But always, student visa run out, have to leave, come back, very expensive. Dad tried repeatedly to get an extended visa and to get residency in the United States, and he was always rejected because he was African. His birth certificate showed that he was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and because he was African in the mid-50s and the mid-60s, in America, he was an undesirable. Would taken forever for him to be able to get in. And as you can see from his picture, he'd be the poster boy for the Caucasian race. The immigration officers just couldn't figure out why he wasn't black. Racism was so stupid that he was stymied in his attempt to become a U.S. citizen because nobody could stop to figure out that a German boy born to German parents was still a German even though he was born in a foreign hospital. And so because my dad couldn't get U.S. residency because he was an African, that's why we ended up in Canada. So technically, I'm an African American. Father born in Africa. Now, because of the color of my skin, I have a lot of privileges that those of my brothers and sisters who also have ancestry in Africa don't have. My mom was German. She had a German certificate, birth certificate. My parents could have entered under her, but my dad was too proud to follow a woman anywhere, and so I guess he gets some of the blame for us being Canadian. But my point is this: racism is just stupid. It is immoral, it is evil, and it's stupid. And if you're a racist, even a little bit, and you don't mind being evil or immoral, don't be stupid, right? And I don't believe that the violent protests that are going on are the appropriate way to address this. The peaceful ones, different story. Something needs to be done. Sometimes we wonder why God doesn't do something to stop injustice. And I'm fully convinced that God is scratching his head, wondering the same thing about us. And I'm not sure just saying, well, I'm not a racist, so it doesn't apply to me. That's not the answer. I'm still processing what else I can do personally, what we as a church can do. We'll be meeting about that this week to know what can we do. What's our part to help end injustice, intolerance, racism, bigotry in all its forms? It's why sometimes God finally has to act in weird ways, ununderstandable ways at times, because we don't. This was happening back in Elijah's day. Baal worship was so evil, so immoral, so evil, so stupid, that God had to step in and do something because his people didn't. Right? Not only did they not stop it, they embraced it. So God had to do something. Now, the biblical record tells us that God stopped the rain. Why? Why stop the rain? Why is God doing that? Is God just trying to starve them out? Is that what's going on here? It sounds like God is laying siege to Israel. If you don't recognize that I'm a God of love, I'm going to starve you to death. Doesn't make any sense, right? Is that what's going on? I read quite a few commentaries on this to see how other people were dealing with this, because I was scratching my head. It just didn't make a lot of sense. There's a consistent story that would come through the commentaries, and it would go something like this. Sometimes we get too comfortable, we get too distracted with all the good things that God has given us, that we forget to love God like we should. And so for our benefit, God will take away everything that we don't need so that we will learn to love him more. Is that it? Is that what's going on? God is punishing Israel so that they will love him more. It's kind of like the old cartoon. How's it go? The layoffs and firing will continue until morale improves. And can you even imagine? Husbands, try this. Tell your wife that you are going to start taking away her cosmetics, her jewelry, her shoes, her nice dress clothes, favorite pieces of furniture, one piece at a time until she starts loving you more. Let me know how that works for you. In case you didn't figure out, I'm kidding. Don't do that. Talk about riots. Obviously, that isn't going to work, right? The point is this. The point isn't that God is taking away everything in order for us to love him more. And if that's not the point, then what is? To try to understand this better, we need to understand Baal worship a little bit better. And like I mentioned over the last few sermons, we talked about how horrible it is. Not going to go into that again. But we're going to take an overview of what Baal, the system of Baal worship, what it was like. Baal was the chief fertility god. And in that ancient belief, the world was divided into cycles. There was the rainy, fertile season, and then there was the dry, drought season. It was a yearly cycle. And so the people would sacrifice at the end of the dry season. The people would sacrifice to Baal in hopes of having enough rain for the crops. Baal would be there helping with the crops grow and everything, and at the end of that time, Baal would go on vacation. They would have an offering to thank him for it. The god Mot, you recognize death in that if you know any Latin, other languages relate to that, is a dry drought season that would come in, and he would reign. Today we recognize these seasons as a result of meteorological changes, heating of and cooling of land masses, ocean masses, et cetera, et cetera. Back then, it was a struggle between Baal and Mot. When Elijah proclaimed that there was not going to be any rain, what season do you suppose they were in? Were they in the wet season or the dry season? Got to be the wet season. Wouldn't make any sense to be in the middle of the dry season. I mean, any of us could do that. Dry season, hasn't rained for forever. I'm going to stop the rain. Oh, yeah, well, big deal. It's the rainy season, right? And how do we know it was the rainy season? Well, we know it was a rainy season because the brook Kerith was wet during that time, had water in it. And the brook Kerith only had water during the wet season. It dried up during the dry season. God tells Elijah, tell Ahab to stop in the middle of the rainy season. He didn't do this to starve out the people. He did this to let them know what we know in the 21st century, that Baal is not in control of the seasons. And he also wanted them to know that Mot is not the go-to guy. This is a natural phenomenon. This is established by God. Only God can change it. And so he did. Now, occasionally, the rainy season wouldn't be as long, and there would be a drought during the rainy season. But the next year, generally, it would start again. So if God just said, hey, I'll do this for 1 year, and the rain started the next year, people are like, oh, that's just normal. Baal took a longer vacation than normal. It's not a big deal. But the next year, Baal wasn't able to bring rain. Or the next. How long did the drought last? 3.5 years. So if it started in the wet season, when did it stop? When did the rains begin? In the middle of the dry season. This is totally opposite. I think the next graphic kind of shows that. There we go. Starts in the middle of the rainy season. 3.5 years starts in the middle of the dry season on it. God is not starving them. He's disrupting their whole religious paradigm. I see what's going on here. Again, this is part of a love story. God isn't beating them into submission. This is a loving God who's carefully teaching them that the unjust, immoral, stupid, evil worldview they're committed to is based on faulty assumptions. This is God once again trying to save his kids, even though he knows they're going to continue to reject him. This is, we talked about last time, over 1,000 years since God told Abraham the Amorites are going to be a problem, right? This is not an impatient act on God's part, being very patient here. And I can only imagine Elijah is a little bit nervous about all of this. He knows that his pronouncement of no rain is in direct opposition to what has now been the unofficially become the state religion of Israel. So he has no choice but to flee. God tells him, go to the brook Kerith. You'll have plenty of water there. And Elijah has to know that the brook is going to dry up. But at least for now, he's got water. So it must have come to some sense of release to him that, at least he's going to be taken care of. But then God's got this sense of humor. Elijah hasn't even had the opportunity to relax about not having any water when God says, well, I'm going to feed you. Whew, this is awesome. Not exactly God feeding him. He's got ravens feeding him. This isn't normal. Ravens don't share food, right? They're skeptical. Here's what one source says about the ravens. I just Googled it quickly, brought up the first one that came up. Ravens are scavengers, often seen in the company of magpies, eagles, vultures, or seagulls where appropriate. Ravens will eat just about anything that is dead. Well, it doesn't seem like it could get any worse. And then it does. These same birds that have just been feasting on dead things are now bringing Elijah food. Why not just provide a restaurant? Right? Have servants bring food into Elijah. Why not? I don't know. I wonder if this was for Elijah's own protection. If there had been a regular supply of food coming into his location, maybe word would have gotten out. Maybe Jezebel would have heard, right? Found him. I don't know. But it's part of a love story. So I've got to assume that getting fed by ravens is doing at least two things. One, it's providing miraculously, letting Elijah know that God's miraculous power is still working on his behalf. And secondly, it's there to keep him safe. At least it's food. Can't get any worse than that, right? And then it does. Notice what we read next. Verse 7. Sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. And we called this a wadi. The word brook is best translated wadi. In certain Arabic countries, it's a word for a valley, a ravine, a channel that's dry, except the wet season it's water flowing, dry season it dries up. That's why Elijah knew it was going to dry up. But since God had stopped the rains before, why not just keep the brook Cherith flowing for him, huh? Again, it's a love story. God is lovingly looking out for Elijah. What do you suppose would happen if the brook Cherith continued to have fresh water flow through it? People would find out. Elijah would be found. God had to protect Elijah. There was a contract put out on him. So the brook dried up. But God didn't leave him unprovided for. Continue the story. Verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I've directed a widow there to supply you with food. And those of you who are familiar with the story, you know how this turns out. God provides not only for Elijah, but he also provides for this widow and her son. She's down to her last bit of flour, last bit of oil. She hears from God that Elijah is coming. He asks for food. He meets her. He asks for the food. She provides. And can you imagine what's going on in this poor woman's mind? And she's ready to eat her last bit of food and then wait for her and her son to die this horrible death of starvation. Think it can't get any worse. And then it does, because now she's got to share her food. And she doesn't have enough for herself. She doesn't have enough for her kid. And yet she's asked to share. I mean, it's unimaginable. I can't imagine the stress, the selfless poor widow, what a love she has, not only for her son, but also for others. Amazing woman, an amazing example of the kind of human being we all ought to be. And what an amazing God. As long as Elijah is with her, flour doesn't run out, oil doesn't run out. She and her kid and Elijah have plenty to eat. Relief at last. What an amazing love story. Surely this is it. It can't get any worse. And then it does. Skip down a few verses. Verse 17. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse. Finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and then kill my son?" I mean, can you imagine her grief? Some of you can. You've lost children. You've lost grandchildren. I can't imagine anything worse. You notice how quickly things have changed. One day she's so thankful that this man of God has come into her life and provided for her and her kids. And the next day, what do you have against me? Come to remind me of my sin. You're here to kill my son. Imagine what's going on in Elijah's mind. He's hiding from the king and the queen. He's been fed by scavengers. His water's run out. Now he's being taken care of by a widow. He finally can rest knowing that at least one person, this widow, is on his side. And then this. It can't get any worse. And then it does. She turns on him. She turns on God. And you know the story. The story ends in a mind-blowing way. Elijah goes to the child, prays to God. Child is brought back to life. We read this, verse 23. He gave him to his mother, and he says, look, your son is alive. Verse 24, and the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you're a man of God, and the word of the Lord from your mouth is in truth. Now I know. Did you catch that? Now I know. I mean, after all the years of being fed an endless supply of meal, oil, and flour from nothing, now she knows. Some have suggested that God rewarded her faith and brought her boy back to life. I don't think so. She didn't have much faith. It's amazing to consider it. But with all the evidence that she had, constant supply of food from nothing, she still wasn't sure. Instead of coming to Elijah and saying something like, you know, God has been really good to us over these years, and I know he's passionate about providing for us. He's obviously loves me and my kids so much. Just amazing. Do you think he could do this one little thing for us? I mean, that would be a person of faith. Logical response. What was the response? Wasn't a faith response. She yells at the prophet. She rails against God for judging her unfairly. And what did God do? It's a love story. God didn't restore her child because of her faith. She didn't have any faith. God restored her child because of his great love. Elijah running, afraid, lacking in faith, even after pronouncing that there'd be no rain, and God comes through on his promise for that. The widow giving up on God even after he'd been faithful in keeping her and her son alive, when it doesn't seem like it can get any worse. God still comes through. Not because we are faithful, not because we are deserving, not because we pray enough, not because we trust him enough. God surrounds his kids, that's you and me, because he's crazy about us. It's a love story. I still don't know why we all don't get all the miracles that we would like to have, think that we need, perhaps do need. But this I know. We are in the middle of a love story. And I don't know where you're at today. Maybe you're at the end of the rope thinking it can't get any worse. It might. But guess what? No matter what you face, no matter how much worse things get, no matter how weak our faith is, because it really isn't about our faith. It's a love story. God is still crazy about his kids. And no matter what you face, God will never leave you. And it is his love that will motivate everything that he does on our behalf. My prayer for you is this: that when you're in a situation where it seems like it can't get any worse, and then it does, remember, you're in a love story. God isn't punishing you. Evil is in the world because of sin. Injustice, racism, poverty, stupidity, pain are a constant reality because that's the nature of sin. But no matter what we face, God will never leave us. He is by our side, helping and loving, never leading. That's the kind of God that I want to make a difference for. How about you? Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for being that kind of God. Thank you for putting us in the middle of your love story. And when things all around us are just crazy and we feel like pioneers walking into a new uncharted land, wondering what's coming around the corner, you have already been there and you will always be there with us. Thank you for being crazy about your kids. We're crazy about you. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. God bless. Appreciate you hanging there. Keep safe. Pastor Rebecca is going to be right here with the tokens for the kids, so come on up. Have a great week.